3 years ago, a 19-year-old boy was given a job. His job was to go to a spot 75 miles offshore of Indonesia and live on a raft. It had like a little house on it large enough for him to lie down on. He was to go out there at nighttime, shine lights into the water, and fish would be drawn to it. And once a week, someone would come out there and capture the fish from him and take it back inshore. Well, on July 14th, 2018, a storm came through and broke the rope. And he's on this little raft that's not a boat, it's just a raft. And he's just drifting along. For 49 days, he was out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and nobody knew he was out there. Or rather, the people who went out to get the fish knew he was gone, but had no clue where he was. He stated later that occasionally he would see ships at a distance go by, but they were too far away and filled with cargo. They didn't have passengers on the side watching out for straying rafts. But it wasn't until the 49th day that he's out in the ocean that all of a sudden he's rescued. Turns out he traveled over 1,200 miles, almost to Guam from Indonesia. He drifted that far without a boat, without a motor, without a sail. He traveled that great distance. And that has a lot to do with what we want to talk about today. By the way, if we know about the story, you know he got rescued on the 49th day. So it's about 24 miles of traveling every day. He drifted that far and didn't even know it. It's kind of like the way we are. We live our lives and we don't know that anything is wrong, and we start drifting further away from a standard. I think those of you who are up in years really see that when you look at the United States. You go, well, when I was a teenager back in the 1980s, or back in the 60s, or 50s, or wherever you fit in, you'll say, wow, things sure have changed a lot. And up until the last few years, we've seen major changes in a short time. But for the most part, it's a slow drift, but we think back over the years and you go, look at the distance. It's far greater than 1,200 miles. What happened? The issue for this boy named Aldi Adalag, the situation was that the rope snapped. The drifting was not necessarily the problem. It was that the rope broke. And we're going to notice a passage today in which King Solomon, who started off so well, ended up drifting over the years. And let's not focus on the drifting. The real question is, when did he let go of the rope? What was that point in his life that he let go and the drifting began? Because that's the key. Once we know that, then somehow, some way, and I know in his case, he knew what the problem was, but he couldn't exactly go back 1,200 miles and grab the rope. But we can. So let's look at the scripture passage today, which we have just read in 1 Kings chapter 11. And let's look at how Solomon let go of the rope. Again, let's take a quick review of the last few weeks, where 3 Sundays ago we talked about how God came to Solomon for the first time in a greater appearance and said to him, Solomon, you have one wish. What do you want? He says, I want wisdom. Oh, that so pleased the Lord. Then the next time we noticed that he was finishing the temple. He was praying. And God came to him a second time and said, Solomon, I'm so happy. This is so exciting. And he goes on to say, yes, I will honor your prayers and I will bless this nation. And then last week we noticed that because he had honored the Lord and because the prosperity had increased and people had heard about God, that even Queen of Sheba traveled 1,200 miles or 1,500 miles to go to Israel to hear about God. I mean, things keep building now to a crescendo. But somehow or another, Solomon let go of the rope. I want us to look at step 5 first, and we're going to go backwards to step 1, because step 1 is where he let go of the rope, but this is the part at first for us to look at that's so obvious. It takes place in verses 5 through 8. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not follow the Lord fully, as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountain which is east of Jerusalem, and for Moloch, the detestable idol of the sons of Ammon. Thus also he did for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. So here's what happened. Solomon did all of these evils. Specifically on your notes, you could say that Solomon worshiped foreign gods. You could say, how did he drift so far? I mean, we were in chapter 10. He's bragging to the Queen of Sheba, look, I have a stairway from my palace to the temple so that I can be with the Lord. And now one chapter later, he's worshiping other gods. Some of these gods, when you see twice in this passage the phrase detestable, that's because if I were to explain to you what took place right now, you'd probably kick me out of the church and say Cornersburg has turned X-rated. It was X-rated worship. Think of an X-rated place in town and people coming together pretending they're worshiping a god, and that is what's going on here. And you ask again, how did Solomon drift so far, so fast? Let's go to step 4. This is what took place before he worshiped the gods. In verse 4, we see that for when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods. So step 4 in our outline is that Solomon followed his wives. Here is a bigger point to draw. God shows us throughout the Bible that whatever you give into will eventually control you. You can say all you want, but it was just one drink. Well, it was just one visit to the bar. Well, I just went to Daytona Beach for just 1 week. Well, I just did one time. But you can never take a second drink until you've had the first. You can never take drugs the second time until you've had the first. Whatever you give into eventually controls you. And someone says, but I can handle it. No, you can't. Why do you give into it? So that it will affect me. The very statement contradicts itself. I'm giving into this, let's just say alcohol. I'm giving into the alcohol. Why? Because I want it to benefit me. But it's not controlling me. But I want it to control me, but it's not going to control me. Do you see the contradiction there? Everything we give into, I'll just give into food. That's it. The more I eat food, the more I can get my mind off of all of my pains and my thoughts and the things that bother me and the stresses. I'll just sleep more. Whatever you choose eventually controls you. Solomon chose women. Hey, I'll just give in to them. And then he finds out later they ended up controlling him. Well, let's move on to step 3 in this digression. Solomon lusted for women. It wasn't the women that was the problem. It was his lust. That's what led him to step 4. Step 3 appears in verse 1 of chapter 11. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women. Go to the end of verse 2. Solomon held fast to these in love. He would not let them go. Oh, I can't stop this. I've got to be with more women. It was an obsession for him. If one had satisfied, he wouldn't have needed the 999 others. If 100 had satisfied, he wouldn't have needed the other 900. And you can probably figure out, even after 1,000, he was never satisfied. When we lust for things that do not satisfy, it's like drinking out of a bottomless pit that never ends. We are never happy. We're never satisfied. I'd like to comment on the Hebrew word for love. It's an easy word to translate into English because it means the same thing as English. I love my pets. I love chocolate. I love my kids. All the same in English and in Hebrew. The word means the same. Now, if you go to Greek, you have a separation between erotic love and brotherly love and all the agape loves and all, but those are different. So when it says that he loves the women, it doesn't mean that he agape love, cherished them, wanted the best for them. That's why I gave step 3 as Solomon lusted for women. By the way, if you go back several chapters, you'll see that Solomon's half-brother, Amnon, loved his half-sister. And it wasn't love. It was lust. So when you say the word love, don't pretend it's all romantic and ushy-gushy and romantic and wonderful. No, this is not real love that the man, Solomon, is giving to her. Let's go to another word that's in there. If you have King James, the phrase says Solomon loved strange women. Now, throughout King James, you'll see that phrase, strange women. And what strange women refers to is all women other than your own wife. It doesn't mean necessarily those who live more than 1,000 miles away. It means any woman who is not your wife. But when you try to translate that in this, it doesn't make as much sense today. People think, strange women, does that mean they have mental problems or do they act weird? No. So what word do you use? And since so many of his wives listed here were from foreign countries, they translated it foreign. But it does not mean all of his women were foreign. If a man had this much of a problem, I'm sure if he's out and about in town, he sees anybody who says, you're going to be my wife. I'm sure most of his wives or women or whatever you call them were Jewish, Israelis. I mean, he's just going after any female. Now let's look at another word. It says many. We've already read the passage there. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. So he has 1,000 women, minimum, according to this list. Many. I mean, he committed adultery multiple times. Can I add, it might not be to this point of the message yet, what he did was wrong, period, end of subject. But you know, it's easy for him to say, but my dad had a bunch. What parents excuse in moderation, kids often excuse in excess. It's easy for parents to say, well, just one drink a year is okay, but the kids look at that and say, if one's good, well, we might as well have one every hour, or one every day. Parents do something just a few times, it's easy for kids to say, well, 10 miles an hour above the speed limit's okay. Certainly 15 miles an hour should be fine for me. Do you see the drifting? One generation says it's okay to go 5 miles an hour over the speed limit, and the next one goes 10, and then the next generation goes 20, next is 100, and each one is saying the previous one is old-fashioned and square, and all the younger kids going faster are evil. But my standard is right here, and that's the correct standard. We'll talk about that more in a moment. He had many wives. God's standard from the beginning was one man and one wife. Another interesting word in that passage is the very first word. In the New American Standard, which I read, it says now. Some of your translations say but. Some say and. It's incredible how that one little word is big. If you read chapter 10, you see, well, things are going great. Solomon is a godly king. He's leading this nation to love the Lord. He's attracting people from 1,500 miles away. Everything is great. And then you come to the first part of chapter 11, and some say the good translation would be but. And by the way, all those translations and but, now all of those are great. But now we've got to look at the nuance, the perspective. The word but means almost, yes, Solomon did all these good things, but he had this underlying problem at the same time. And that doesn't seem to be the case, because he states in the passage, when he was old. Therefore, the phrase and or but, great translation, but maybe the word now is the best translation that says, yeah, that's the way he used to be. He used to have a heart for God. But years later, now he's changed. He's drifted away from where he should be. Let's move on to step 2. We're getting closer to how did he let go of the rope. So let's look at verses 9 and following. Now the Lord was angry with Solomon because, and I'd like for you to skip now to verse 10. The Lord had commanded him concerning this thing that he should not go after other gods. But he did not observe what the Lord had commanded. The point in verse 10 is he left the standard. Solomon left the standard. The standard was, what did God say? And when you go back in Deuteronomy and the multiple passages, God said multiple times, don't marry multiple wives. Don't marry anyone outside the faith of Israel. I mean, every wife listed here. Certainly he had some who were Israelis, but the only ones listed are those, even his first wife, Pharaoh's daughter, an Egyptian. He keeps marrying people even for political reasons, not just for cases of possibly beauty, but he's not doing it for the main reason. God set a standard. This is the standard. We need to do things God's ways. God has already told us this is what we do. I'd like to give one additional verse for this point, but you would have to go, and you don't need to turn there, but in James chapter 1, beginning with verse 13, God says something very interesting. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. But God cannot be tempted, neither tempts he any man. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and is enticed. And when lust is conceived, it brings forth sin, and when sin is finished, it brings forth death. What's the problem? We chase after things. It's so easy for people to say, well, I wouldn't have bought that hamburger if I hadn't seen that billboard up there. It's all the fault of that billboard for all the sign. And by the way, I say that to the owner of Thanos very often, because as soon as you walk in, here are all these blueberry pies and strawberry pies sitting there, and I've told her how it's such a sin, and she just smiles at me every time. If you give in, James 1 says, you choose. It's no one else's fault. If someone abuses you to the absolute worst extreme and you say bad words, those are your choices of words. No one can make you sin. That is a huge point for us to grab a hold of. We need to quit blaming the billboard, quit blaming the commercials, quit blaming everybody, anything. We need to quit blaming God, even quit blaming Satan. The passage says you go after it because you wanted it, period. It's your lust, your craving desire. So if anyone leaves and says, well, Pastor Randy really put down the women, I don't think any of you would, but anyone may be hearing it on the internet. No, that's not the point. The point is not women. It was Solomon's choice to lust after them. Specifically, he left God's standard. He didn't want to do what God said. He wanted to do what he wanted to do. But that's not even where he let go of the rope. The most important, and it's so easy for us to kind of get upset with people and say, we need to do what God says. That's a true statement. But that's step 2. Let's go back to step 1. This appears in verse 9. Now the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. So now God's coming to him the third time. The issue is this. You are a little child. You're walking down the street holding on to Daddy's hand. He's going in a straight line, but you see something off to the side that gets your attention. It's a balloon. You want that balloon, and the first thing you have to do to go get the balloon is let go of Daddy's hand. That's where you let go of the rope. The issue is not the balloon. The issue is not your lust for the balloon. The issue is not that your dad told you not to chase after the balloon. The issue is you don't love your daddy anymore and appreciate him and respect him and trust him. So you let go. I would really be satisfied if I had that balloon. I think about that because 2 or 3 years ago I went to the July 4 parade in Canfield. I'm walking along the sidewalk right next to the street, Broad Street, and all of a sudden this big bubble, you know how people take those wands and blow a bubble through the air and it's weaving? Well, some little girl saw it and lost all consciousness of the world and went after the balloon, that little bubble. And a car was coming and almost hit her, and I'm standing there and I saw what happened, and I reached up and grabbed her and pulled her back. You know, the problem was not the car, the problem was not the balloon. But for us spiritually, it's when we say, my Heavenly Father doesn't really love me, and I don't love him as much as I want to. I'm going to let go of my hand and go chase after other things. The issue has nothing to do with obedience. It has everything to do with whether or not you really love God. That is the key. Solomon left the Lord. The issue is not that he left the standard. The standard was what the Lord said. But the real issue, when he let go of the rope, it's when he said, I don't need God anymore. I can find joy and happiness and fun in other areas. Isn't it amazing that's what God forewarned? Let me read to you a passage in Deuteronomy 8. Beware that you do not, I need to remind you, this is before they went into the promised land. Just weeks before they went into the promised land, God spoke this to Israel through Moses. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes, which I am commanding you today. Otherwise, when you have eaten and are satisfied, and have built good houses and lived in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and gold multiply, and all that you have multiplies, then your hearts will become proud, and you will forget the Lord. You'll let go of his hand. You'll forget the Lord your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. He led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground where there was no water. He brought water for you out of the rock of flint. In the wilderness he fed you manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and that he might test you, to do good for you in the end. Otherwise you would say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth. But you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who is giving you power to make wealth, that he may confirm his covenant which he swore to your fathers, as it is to this day. What did he just say in that passage in Deuteronomy? He's saying, you human beings, when things start to get easy, think 1 Kings chapter 7 through 10. When you have all the money coming in, when you have a paycheck that's regular, when your life is comfortable, you have air conditioning and heat, whenever you need either, you have all the gas money and all that you need. Who needs God? We let go of the rope. I don't need God anymore. And we just start drifting. And it's more than 1,200 miles we start drifting away. And we just keep getting further and further, and we never realize that we've gotten very far from God. Ask the average Christian, are you a Christian? Oh yeah, I'm a good Christian. I've been baptized. I go to church. I've been at least 20 times last year. That's more than everybody else. I read my Bible sometimes, at least once a week. All they ever talk about is how good they think they are. But you ask someone who's still holding on to the rope, and they say, Jesus is all the world to me, my joy, my life, my all. He is my strength. From day to day, without him, I would fall. This person talks about how much he or she loves Jesus. People drifting talk about how they're not as bad as those people a few miles down the road who have drifted further. But we don't need to talk about these people who haven't drifted as far. They're just kind of fanatics, old-fashioned, traditionalist, fundamentalist, straight-laced, conservative, goody two-shoe. We don't need to be conservative like those people 2 miles behind us. The standard is not 2 miles behind us or where we are. The standard is Jesus Christ himself. Loving him with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our body. That is the standard. It's not how many times you've been to church, how much money you put in the offering plate. Do you love God with all of your heart? How far down the road or the ocean have you drifted? If you do not love God with all of your heart, all of your soul, with all of your might. Do you remember the very first words Jesus said to the church in Ephesians? Your problem is you left your first love. And then an interesting insight appears when he gets to the 7th church in Revelation chapter 3. We almost all know verses 15 and 16. You're lukewarm. You're neither cold or hot. But because you're lukewarm and neither cold or hot, I will spew you out of my mouth. But very few people know the next verse, verse 17, which says, because you say, I am rich, I am wealthy, and have need of nothing. I have my pension plan here in America. What's going on? People are talking about problems, but I'm still getting my paycheck. I'm not sick. I have a house to live in. Who needs God? The issue is not about paychecks. It all goes back, always, to where's the rope? And that rope is Do I love Jesus Christ with all of my soul, all of my heart, and all of my body? Do I enjoy talking about him in public because I love him so much? The issue is not how many wives we have. It's not whether we lust after the wives or other women. It's have we let go of the rope? Do we love God with all of our heart and all of our soul? Let's look at one final aspect of this passage. What are the consequences for letting go of the rope? He begins with verse 11 and actually concludes with verse 40. We're not going to read that all. We'll read just the first few. But isn't it amazing? God spent just as many verses telling Solomon, here's his spanking. He spent those same number of verses explaining to us how he created the whole universe in the same number of verses. Well, one's 31, the other's 30, but that's close enough. The same amount of time. Look at the first few verses, beginning with verse 11. So the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this, and you have not kept my covenant, my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you, and will give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David. But I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for your sake, my servant David, for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. As soon as this took place, it doesn't continue. Remember, I said it continues in verses 14 to 40. He mentions at least 3 adversaries he has raised up to harass Solomon. Why? Because God's mean? No, because God's trying to turn his heart back to him. He's trying to say, if you'll just go back over here and hold on to the rope, things will go back to being good. But unfortunately, he talks like many Americans. You don't understand. We've got the most powerful weapons in the world. We've got all this money. I'm still getting a paycheck. Who needs God? And as God keeps withdrawing his protective hands from us, he's going to do it slowly until we all reach a point where we say, I need God. And it's amazing how our whole countenance and behavior changes. Food is no longer of interest. Paychecks are no longer an interest. Our desperation is for God because he's the only one who can provide. Are any of you drifting away from the standard? Are any of you drifting far away from this point that says, I love the Lord my God with all of my heart, all of my soul, all of my body? If so, would you admit that? And cry out to God in your heart right now and say, God, I admit I don't love you like I really should. But I choose now to get this right. And I want to hang on to the rope from this point on for the rest of my life. If you choose not to do so and you just think things are just okay, you'll just keep drifting. And you'll hear the infamous phrase from other people. I can't believe they did that. Why did they do that? I can't believe someone could do something that bad or that evil. No virgin wakes up in the morning and says, hey, I think I'll get in trouble today. No innocent, righteous Christian wakes up in the morning and says, hey, I think I'll just do something evil today and get in jail. It's a slow, gradual process, and we don't realize how fast we've drifted until we've gotten so far away, it's like almost out of control. Are you drifting today? Would you bow your heads right now? This is a very important moment for all of us. Our denomination is drifting. most churches are drifting. That's their choice. You are the only one who can choose for your life. All you have to do is wave your hand up to God, no matter where you are in the Pacific Ocean. God will see that hand, and he will bring you back to the rope. But you have to humble yourself. You have to admit you are desperately in need. Even if you're a millionaire and you have all kinds of possessions and stuff, we all need God. Our Father, we confess as a nation, as a church, as a body of churches, as individuals, we don't love you like we used to. For many of us, we were excited about you the day we became a Christian. And it's like we are more interested in stuff, things. We're busy doing things we would rather do than have to talk to you or spend time with you. We really are in desperate need of you. Would you show yourself strong in our midst? Show us how desperately we need you. And if our hearts do not change, please do whatever it takes for our hearts to realize how much we need you and return to you. That is our only hope. May you change us. May you change our country, our denomination, our churches. We need you desperately. Please come in at this time and do a great work within us so that we can show to the world what a great God you are. It's in your Son's holy name that we pray. Amen.